Well, good morning and welcome to our Ransomware, Your Business is a Target webinar. I'm Doug Sokolowski with Lam Tech. Before we get started, we do have a couple of housekeeping items to review and let you know about. First off, everybody is muted, so there's no background noise. We do have a question and answer window that's available for use for any questions or comments that you may have. In addition to introducing our guest, I'll also serve as the moderator. We're also joined by our Lam Tech marketing manager, Courtney Hicks, and also our general manager, George Love, in the background. We'll pose all the questions or comments to our presenter to ensure that you do get your answer. There'll also be time available after the webinar to ask questions and we'll either answer them during the course of the webinar or even set up a time to answer your specific questions. Now, we do not have a poll this morning, but we'll see your questions or thoughts. Contact information will also be provided at the end of the webinar for you to get in touch with us at Lam Tech. In addition to our live webinar, we'll also provide a link to the recording should you want to review what you learned today or want to share your knowledge with another person in your organization as well, or even want to show someone that you may refer Lam Tech to. And without further housekeeping items, we do want to get started here this morning. Again, for those that are just joining us, I'm Doug Sokolowski, the account manager for Lam Tech. We welcome you and thank you for your time on today's webinar. I think you're going to learn a lot here today. It's always good to review, especially with backups. Now, Lam Tech, just briefly talking about us, aligns IT solutions with your growth initiatives. Our goal is to take care of your technology so you can focus on your day-to-day business and stop expanding those problems. Give you an overview of the services that you see on our screen. We do things like maintain your security, help desk support, as well as some consulting and data recovery and backup services, which we're actually going to be talking about here today. Now, we'll discuss how has working remote impacted ransomware, especially with COVID-19. Many believe staying the course of security and backup hasn't altered in a remote landscape. Well, we're going to discuss that topic in general, discuss how it has and how who the hackers are actually targeting. We'll show you what the aftermath of a ransomware attack looks like and how you can prevent it and recover it if you're hit with ransomware. Today, we'll be hearing from our senior channel development manager of Datto, Michael DePalma, who has been a Lam Tech partner, it's been a little over a decade now, since 2010. He has joined us here this morning and give you a chance to unmute yourself there. But good morning, Michael. How are you today?
Good morning, Doug. How you doing? You hear me all right? You hear me all right, Doug?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, great. So my name is Mike DePalma. I am the Senior Channel Development Manager here at Datto. Normally, my job takes me kind of all over North America doing these sort of educational webinars, panels, things like that. Obviously, I've been grounded for about 13 months, although things are starting to open up. But I still have been doing a lot of these presentations and have been fortunate enough to do some alongside some folks from the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, various state agencies. And so a lot of the stories and kind of suggested ways to combat these threats have come directly from them. So I want to share a lot of those stories as well as some of the ones that we've uncovered internally. Very briefly about Datto. So we are a disaster recovery company. We're based out of Norwalk, Connecticut. So we're about 40 miles east of Manhattan. For the business owners, entrepreneurs on the call, it's actually a very interesting story. Our founder started the company about 14 years ago at the age of 22, started building these little devices by hand and selling them online. You fast forward to the fall of last year and we became a publicly traded company. So it's really one of those American dream kind of basement to billion stories, which is pretty cool. So now we're a global company approaching 2,000 employees worldwide, and we protect over an exabyte of data in our 9 data centers. So we've got 2 here in the States, 1 in Pennsylvania and 1 out in Utah, and then 7 others around the globe. And if you're not familiar with the size of an exabyte, we live our world on Zoom right now. You can record a Zoom meeting for about 237,000 years before you hit an exabyte of data. So again, one of the largest private data centers in the world. But to get started, I'm a little bit of a history nerd. That's kind of my hobby. When I was back on the road, that's what I was doing on the planes, kind of reading stories and watching documentaries and things like that. And so I like to put things into a historical context. You look at the course of human history, there has always been these stages in which there was some sort of technological advancement, right, that propelled us forward, whether it's the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Industrial Revolution. Now, if historians move forward 1,000 years and look back into the time we're living now, clearly it's the digital revolution age, right? It's the data-driven age. And thank goodness we're in this place right now. That's what has allowed us to stay productive over the last 12 months of chaos. The problem is, during every one of these phases of technological advancement, there were always bad actors on the other side exploiting those technologies. We see that now more than ever. These folks are very opportunistic. So as the workforce shifted to either a remote workforce or a hybrid workforce, the criminals really saw this as low-hanging fruit. And that's why we saw an uptick in all kinds of attacks, but specifically ransomware, as folks move to insecure networks or maybe personal devices, or just people's guards were let down as they were working from a personal device or just working from their kitchen and all the rest. And they seized on these opportunities. And so that's where we sit right now. And, you know, when you read a lot of stories, one of the problems that we see, especially in the small to medium-sized business community, is that the stories that make the news are the large sensational stories, right? The hospitals, municipalities, Fortune 500 companies, global companies, because that's what, you know, is going to get the clicks. So that kind of leads the small business community to say, hey, two things. One, it's not going to happen to me. Why would they focus on me when they can go after these big fish? Or folks throw their hands up and say, hey, the US government was attacked. What am I going to do as a small business? But I think the conversation really needs to shift from not just cybersecurity. I think folks are starting to understand the importance of cybersecurity, but that's only really one piece. The real question you need to ask yourself is, how cyber resilient is my business? If I'm going to put all these systems in place in order to protect my data and protect my business, but if something were to happen, how quickly can I detect that that attack occurred? And then how resilient is my business to get back up and running? Because it really is that downtime that is the bigger hit than the actual risk of data loss. But I do like some of the stories that make the news because we have hard numbers. It's not a theoretical, this is what a ransomware attack might cost the business. When you look at the city of Baltimore, this was a very high publicized attack back in 2019. So they were hit, they were asked for what was essentially about $75,000 in Bitcoin. Now, it's important to note that the criminals will almost always ask for money in Bitcoin nowadays. They're not going to ask you to ACH money out. They're not going to ask for a credit card, because with Bitcoin, it's an anonymous cryptocurrency that's almost impossible to track. So the government can't really come in and figure out exactly where that money is going. So we've seen a huge shift in that, and that has actually helped these criminals for several reasons. One, again, it's really accelerated their efforts because they know there's very little risk of getting caught. But there's actually another layer to this, which shows the sophistication of these folks. They have been attacking the business community for close to a decade now, specifically with these ransomware attacks, always asking for the money in Bitcoin. So think about it this way. They were accumulating Bitcoin 6-7 years ago when a Bitcoin was $50. If you've been following it recently, I mean, it's peaking at $50,000. So yeah, you have the friend who goes to the dinner parties and brags about how the fact that he got in on Bitcoin when it was $500. And those stories are great. The ones you read in the paper, the 18-year-old millionaire. But the reality was the folks that are making hundreds of millions of dollars when we see these spikes in Bitcoin are these criminals. And so there's a lot of layers to what these folks are doing. But back to the city of Baltimore. So they're hit with ransomware. Now, the government always says don't pay the ransom for several reasons. One, you're emboldening these folks. So for them, they want to really start to reduce the amount of attacks. And that's one of the ways to do it, is to show that it's not profitable anymore. But the other reason also is it puts a bigger bullseye on your back. If you pay once, you're more apt to pay again. And so the city of Baltimore is hit. They decide not to pay the ransom. So what did it cost them? Well, a few months later, they acknowledged that the attack actually cost the city about $18 million. This right here is the math that the criminals want you to do. Pay me my $75,000 in Bitcoin, or go ahead and try to restore all your systems. This is where the cyber resiliency side comes into play. How quickly is the city of Baltimore able to recover all that data and then get everybody up into a production environment where they could do their job as normal? It cost them about $18 million. This math is scalable. If you are a small business and they ask you for $5,000, they are relying on the fact that it's going to cost you far more to try to restore and recover that data than it is to pay the $5,000. And unfortunately, yeah, I'm a diehard suffering Mets fan, so I'll put it into baseball perspective. There's really two types of criminals here. There are the home run hitters who are going to go after the city of Baltimore, trying to get the big 6-7 figure payout, knowing that they're going to have a lower rate of getting through. But if they do, it's a huge payout. Or where the most of these criminals sit are in the singles hitters category. They're going to go out and attack thousands of small to medium-sized businesses every day with the knowledge that they're going to have a higher success rate of getting through, but more importantly, a higher success rate of these folks actually paying, because they can't absorb an impact like an $18 million impact. And so I mentioned the government has been saying for years not to pay the ransom. Finally, in October of this previous year, the Treasury Department put out an official statement. Within that statement, it was specific to ransomware and the payment of ransomware. By paying that ransom, you're actually at risk of violating the law. And the reason behind this is that a lot of times the folks behind these attacks are not the guy in his couch anymore. They are terrorist organizations. They are oftentimes enemy nation states. So by paying the ransom, you could inadvertently be paying one of these criminal organizations. Now, there's not a lot of teeth behind this yet, because again, they have a very hard time tracking where this money is going, but it does show you the direction that the government is going in. They know there's very little that they can do to catch these criminals or prevent them from doing the attack. So what their plan is to shift that burden essentially over to the business community, saying it is your job to protect all of this data and your client data and your employee data. Because if you get attacked, hopefully you survive it and you're able to recover your data and you keep your doors open. But we as the government are going to come knocking on your door, asking you to show us that you did all your due diligence to protect that data. And so that really shows you where it's going. But let's get back to the city of Baltimore. So they remediate all of that, all the issues that they had. They get back up and running, right? The $18 million impact, but they didn't do anything to really prevent the next attack. So what happened? Well, in November of this past year, the school systems were hit right during Thanksgiving break. And it shows this bigger bullseye on your back. Now, what you'll notice is they didn't pay the first time. So why would they go after the city of Baltimore again? It's for this reason right here. They knew it was going to be a major story. And so it does a few things. It shows the business community that, hey, we can get through to anybody, back to that previous point that I made. But also it scares people into saying, well, this attack is going to come. I have to go out and buy some Bitcoin in order to be prepared for this, because you don't just walk into a Wells Fargo and say, hey, give me $10,000 in Bitcoin. There's a process to doing that. And so as people buy Bitcoin, what happens? The Bitcoin goes up and they make money without you even paying the ransom. And so there's a lot of layers to that. So who are these threat groups? I mentioned the terrorist organizations, but for the most part, what we're seeing is really a corporate structure. You have, the ransomware developers, the smart guys that are out there creating these variants, but for the most part, they are not the ones doing the actual attacks. They sell those variants down on the dark web to what I would call the sales team. That sales team then goes out and does all of these attacks. There's even a third layer with some of these variants, which is tech support, if you can believe that, where they will pop up and say, oh, you don't have a Bitcoin account? No problem. I'll help you set that up. Or they pose as a tech support team. Oh, we noticed there's this ransomware. We could help remediate that for $2,500 or whatever you need. And again, I think this is important to know what we're up against. There are folks on Earth right now that wake up in the morning, they shower, they drive to work, they punch in their time card, and all they do is all day long, they do these attacks. And then at the end of the day, they punch out, they go home and have dinner with their families like it was any other job. That's how lucrative this is. And that's how confident these folks are that they're not going to get caught. Now, we do see some insider threats, a lot of times at the enterprise space, but I will note that there was an uptick in that in 2020. The thought process kind of being, well, there's a lot of disgruntled employees, a lot of layoffs, people were doing some malicious things on the way out. So we did see an uptick in that. So it's something to be aware of, although it's not a huge percentage of what we're seeing. Organized crime is a space where we don't necessarily think of when we think of ransomware attacks or even cyber attacks in general. But yes, they will follow the money. It's no longer, Goodfellas and Sopranos and all the rest. If there is money to be made with little risk of getting caught, believe me, all organized crime here in the States, Europe, Russia, China, they're following the money. Now, I mentioned those nation states. The scary part about this goes back to the city of Baltimore is that, yes, they're in this to make money. And the government will tell you, look, we can put all the sanctions in the world on these folks. They're going to find ways to fund themselves. Cyber attacks is one of them. But a lot of times their goal is just to get that story out there, that yes, we have the ability to get in wherever we want. It scares the business community. It causes distrust within the business community. So there's a lot of layers to that. And the last thing is the Internet of Things. And I actually, in the last webinar we did with LambTech, I shared this story, but I'll share it again. You can go and Google this. Back in 2017, the most lucrative casino heist was perpetrated. And it wasn't the guys, again, sneaking through the elevator shafts or, ski masks, guns a-blazing. What they were able to do is find a vulnerability in the internet-connected fish tank thermometer. And with that, they were able to infiltrate the network and extract all the financial and personal information about all the high rollers that gamble at that casino, information that's worth millions of dollars on the dark web. So again, this is where crime has gone. This is how bank robberies are done for the most part. It's not guys in ski masks with a getaway car in the parking lot. It is done in the cyberspace. And so we internally do a state of the ransomware report every single year. Because yes, there's a lot of great third-party data out there, but again, this is the world that we live in. And so we do our own report. We interview thousands of managed service providers like LambTech, as well as the business community. And the numbers that we've seen really follow the same trend. One of the things that we see is here, yes, we saw an uptick in the healthcare community last year. That's pretty simple to answer. They're opportunistic. The healthcare industry had a lot of pressure on it. And so they knew they were going to have a higher success rate of getting through and a higher success rate of these folks paying. If you're a major hospital network that's down, you really can't absorb that. So yes, those payments weren't necessarily in the news, but in conversations I've had with governmental agencies or even stories that they shared publicly in some of these panels, yes, there were big payouts being made. But I think the most important piece of this is you could see every single industry is on this chart. Because really the simplicity of ransomware is what makes it so successful. For the most part, they're not extracting their data. Yes, there are variants out there where they are stealing the data, but for the most part, they're just encrypting it. And so they don't care what your data is. You can be a one-man nonprofit that has data that really has no value on the dark web. They don't care because they know that you can't operate without it. And so you're more apt to pay. And you look at some of these, you look at the legal vertical, it's kind of in the middle of the pack, but I did a webinar yesterday, actually. It was one of the continuing education credits for a bunch of law firms. And there were folks from the American Bar Association on that. And they shared a study that showed in 2020, about 30% of law firms that they surveyed had an attack. And they are showing that that's an increase. And that's just one particular vertical. You could see this in every single industry. Now, the ways they are getting through for them is a good news because they don't really need to change what they're doing. Yes, they're seeing some brute force and an uptick in that, but the vast majority of these attacks occur through phishing emails, through somebody in your organization not knowing what they're supposed to be looking for, being asleep at the wheel, clicking on something they're not supposed to, and really just opening the door to these criminals to get into your network. We're still seeing that. And again, it's not the emails that seem very simple, the Nigerian prince, or, hey, I found bad things on your laptop, I'm going to share it with everybody where there's typos in it. Those aren't overly successful, although people still fall for them. Instead, what we see is what we call spear phishing attacks, or even bigger, a bigger problem is the social engineered spear phishing attacks. And we give plenty of information freely out on the web, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's on Facebook, all the rest. Information that a criminal can use to create an email that looks like it's coming from every other email in your inbox. And I've seen presentations live where they will show exactly how you can do that. Actually, about 2 years ago, I was doing a presentation down in Pennsylvania with a gentleman from the FBI. And in the middle of his presentation, scary stuff, hacktivism, all those things, he shows a picture of this house. He says, anybody recognize this house? And just a couple hundred people in the audience, but somebody says, yeah, that's my house. It's a beautiful house. And, you just got a promotion at work. That's great. Starts rattling off all these facts about this guy. Now, obviously, everybody in the audience is thinking, oh, this is the FBI using all their tools. The partner, the FBI agent just essentially said, all I did here was I got the list of registrants for this event. And I pulled one of you at random, and all I had was your name and the company you worked for. And I found you on LinkedIn. And with that, now I had your face plus a lot of information about you, which allowed me to go find you on Facebook. And there's a lot of other ways that they're exploiting Facebook as well, which is another story. We can get into a deep dive on that, but don't fill out those hey, how much do you know about Disney movies or all the rest? Because that's data collection. They might find you on Instagram or Twitter. And within a couple minutes, you can find out enough you need to create an email. So the particular person in the audience went to Penn State. He said, okay, if I'm a criminal, I'm going to exploit that, knowing that Penn State's got one of the largest and most active alumni associations in the world. So I'm going to send out an email to you. I knew when you graduated, say, okay, you've got your 20-year reunion festivities. Click here for more information. You're going to click on it because it looks like every other email in your inbox. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to go down the list and send out an email that looks like it's coming internally. Maybe it looks like it's coming from a vendor or previous employer. And there's a lot of ways they can do that. I screen grab some of this stuff. I see things, I get these ones from PayPal all the time. Looks pretty legitimate, right? Update your account. You're looking at it quickly. Okay, maybe I need to update this. Sometimes they'll say your account's been hacked and money's been transferred out of it. A couple simple things to remember where you see it in the up at top. Yeah, I could put anything within who the email's coming from. This looks like it's coming from PayPal. But when you look at it, you could tell this is not coming from PayPal, right? At news.nemchep.com is not where a PayPal payment's going to come from. Now they've gotten more advanced. Sometimes it'll look like PayPal, but it's got a little typo in it or something like that. But that's the first thing you can do. Just hover over that. Look to see if it looks like an email that might be actually coming from PayPal. I get them from Wells Fargo as well. This looks pretty simple. Now, some of the things you could look for: valued member, dear customer. Normally, if it's something important about your account, they're going to have your name in there. So that's one thing to look at. Another thing you see, this is actually, the Harry Rilling is the mayor of Norwalk. I know the mayor pretty well. I used to be on the city council. So it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility I'm getting an email from the mayor. Now, this has a lot of flags in it. Good day, Michael DePalma seems a little informal. Need your attention urgently. Do you have a moment? This isn't a very good one. Plus, again, you could look at the who it's coming from. That's clearly not the mayor, but it shows you somebody did some research about me. They know that an email from Harry Rilling I probably would open. I don't know what rabbit hole I would go down if I was clicking on this. But again, these are the things, and you get them every single day. Look out for them. Share them with other members within your organization. I do. And say, hey, look, this one's pretty good. This one's not very good. I've got a Slack channel with my team. There's 4 of us where we look at some of these things to try to educate some folks on what's out there. This one is actually really good. The FSA store, right? For my medical stuff, looks pretty legitimate. Now, what was interesting about this one, which was very surprising, was a lot of these links within there, the buy now, because you could hover over the links, were legitimate links. They would have sent me to this FSA perks website. But I look at this, that does not look like it's coming from anything that looks like it's my FSA account. And it's got a dear nothing, which is another kind of trigger. But when you look at the PayPal payment, the actual one that they want you to click on, because, hey, it doesn't look like I'm buying these products, you click on, you hover over that, it's something that clearly is not sending it. But what I thought was interesting is at the bottom of that email, all those other links were real. But the one that they wanted me to click on to cancel this order that I didn't order was a malicious site. So again, some of the things to look out for. And when I go back to the cyber resiliency side of things, a lot of times folks, they do understand that they need to be secure. But the security sometimes is viewed as something you can go buy off the shelf. I'm going to go buy a security product, some technology to just protect me completely. That is only one phase of it. When we look at the businesses that were hit with ransomware, where a ransomware attack actually occurred, about 6 in 10 of them did have an anti-malware filtering in place. We did see endpoint detection in place. They still were getting through because, again, a lot of times they're not going through with brute force. They're waiting for somebody to open the door. Doesn't mean you shouldn't have all those things. It's a multi-layered approach. And more importantly, you've got to think of it as a fully culture of security. When you look at cyber resiliency, I can break it down into people, processes, and technology. People are your first line of defense. Those phishing emails, all of those different things. The processes you have in place is the other piece, which is, okay, what systems do I have? Who do I contact? Who's in charge of what? Who has admin access to what? How often am I doing training? And then the technology comes in, and there's a lot of great technology out there. It can be difficult to sift through all of the vendors and try to cobble together a solution. This is one of the reasons you should be working with LambTech, because this is what they do. They vet all these vendors. They make sure that they integrate with everybody. They make sure that they do all the things that they say they're going to do. So again, I think this is important to understand. Now, the aftermath of the attacks, this goes back to that $18 million number. When people think of ransomware, it's about, all right, my data is encrypted. I need to get that data back. That is one piece of it. but how long is it going to take you? Your backup is only as good as the speed in which you can recover that data. So it's really the loss of productivity, that downtime, that is the real impact to the business community. And I can remember reporting on these statistics back in 2018. It was the same style report. I'd have to go around and present these to various organizations. And I can remember saying, okay, look, the average ransomware payment is $4,600, not necessarily enough to break the bank. The impact to a business that's hit is 10 times higher. It's over $40,000. Big numbers, right? Look at where these numbers have gone. The number that they're actually asking for has not really increased all that much. It's pretty stagnant. But look at what that impact has become. In North America, over $300,000 is the average cost of downtime for one of these attacks. I did a presentation with a gentleman from the Department of Homeland Security about 2 months ago or so, and they're very strict. They won't let you share their slides. I would love to be able to share them. They don't even let you take pictures of them. It's very interesting because they're telling you all this data publicly, so I don't mind sharing it. Their figure for the length of downtime from a ransomware attack was 16.2 days. So start to put that in perspective. Everyone, joining this webinar is going to have a different, you're in different industries, different sizes and all the rest, but try to really understand what it would cost your business to be down for 16.2 days. Again, this is where the resiliency side comes in. A lot of these folks that were attacked, they had a lot of great systems in place. It blocked the vast majority of these attacks from coming through. But if you are attacked, how resilient are you? Because the scary number within this report was this one right here. And personally, I take a little offense to this because, again, all I do are these educational webinars. But when we talk to business owners, only 3 in 10 of them were very concerned about ransomware, despite the fact that it's a multi-billion-dollar industry that is focused on the small to medium-sized businesses. Despite the fact that we saw an increase over the last 12 months, that number actually came down. In 2019, that number was 41%. So for some reason, the business community now feels less concerned about these attacks. And maybe that was because everybody was running around with their hair on fire, trying to keep their doors open. And I completely understand that. But again, the criminals see this number and say, hey, you know what? For 2021, we don't have to change our business model at all. We know it's working. We know that the business community is not putting in systems and processes in place to protect that data. So we don't have to change a thing. So I think this is important to kind of understand what we mean by resiliency. Because what this shows you is, okay, disastrous attacks, there's disaster strikes, there's 2 different things you got to be cognizant of. First of all, right, how much data am I at risk of losing? So that star on the left-hand side of the screen is your recovery point objective, which really just means how much data are you at risk of losing. Is that an hour? Is that a day? Essentially, how often are you taking those backups? Now, the caveat obviously is you have to test those backups. Somebody has to be monitoring those backups, or you can't answer that question. But that's really the first piece of leverage that they have with a ransomware attack. They've encrypted your data. If you're not backing up that data, or you can't recover that data, well, you've got no other recourse but to pay or probably close your doors. That being said, they know that the vast majority of business owners are backing up their data in some form or fashion. So if that was their one piece of leverage, it would not be a multi-billion-dollar a year industry. The real focus here is that right-hand side of the screen, recovery time objective. This is critical. How much downtime would you incur? Would that be an hour? Would that be a day, a week, the 16.2 days? This is the question you need to ask. And then essentially, how much would that cost you? That's very, very critical. So we start looking at that, okay? Let's look at how you kind of combat that. One of the things we talk about with the instant virtualization piece is, okay, you get something occurs, okay? Whatever that is. Maybe somebody does click on one of these malicious emails and encrypt that data. Your first reaction should not be, all right, I got to go restore that data, right? Your first reaction needs to be, I got to get everybody in my office back up and running. I got to get, and then let the techs come in and do that forensics. So what really occurs now is the way that backup occurs is vastly different than it was 10 years ago. And the problem is a lot of businesses have not evolved with what the technology has done. 10 years ago, and even today, I mean, traditional backup, that commoditized backup, it's backing up the files and folders and volumes that you're telling it to. And that's great. Now you have a copy of all that data. it has evolved to, when you look at business continuity, that cyber resiliency side, is that now you can take a full snapshot of that entire server. You can capture all the volumes and the files and folders, but also the operating systems, the applications, everything that lives on that server can now be replicated over to that on-premise backup. In the case of Datto, it also gets sent off to those 2 data centers that I mentioned. So you've got 3 copies of that entire server. And so what happens now is it gives you the ability to do a couple of things. You've taken that full base image, you've got everything that lives there. You can set up a schedule that looks like whatever you want it to be to cover that RPO side, whether it's hourly, daily. All those backups are going along automatically and being tested. But all it's doing is taking backups of the changes that are occurring between those 2 points in time. And when it's not taking a full backup of that entire server. So that allows you to do is create what's called an inverse chain, because you will read stories about the fact that criminals are now, yes, encrypting a server, but also trying to go and find that backup as well. What an inverse chain allows you to say is, okay, every one of these backup points is independent of one another. And so if I'm hit at 11 o'clock, I've got no risk of that ransomware going and attacking previous backups. So what would happen is you'd call up LambTech, and they would spin up what's called a virtual machine from this actual device. And so everybody now within your organization is operating business as usual. This is operating as your server. It's got access to all those applications, the operating systems. For the most part, if this is happening locally, folks in the office aren't even going to know this occurred. So now you're up and running, and now the IT team can go in and do some forensics on that device that's been attacked. Could put a new piece of hardware in place or wipe that clean. Meanwhile, your entire office is up and running. And when you're back to getting a new piece of hardware in place, now you could start that restoration process and get your business back to not where you were when that attack occurred, but instead where you were once that new piece of hardware is in place. And you can actually start that virtualization while you're in, start that restoration while you're in that virtualized state. So what this allows you to do, this virtualization, is really address that resiliency problem. You're now talking about minutes or hours to get those systems up and running instead of the days, weeks, 16.2 days. You're going to be able to answer those RTO and RPO questions. At a minimum, watching this webinar, please try to go back and figure out what systems you have. Make sure that your RPO, first of all, is aggressive enough. If you're backing up daily, make sure that you can absorb losing a day's worth of data and make sure that they're being tested and all the rest. But then try to answer the RTO question, which can be difficult if you've never done a full-blown test, if you've never been able to say, okay, how long would it take me to get that data back? Try to put a day value on that and also a monetary value on that as well. With this, all of these virtualization capabilities are tested as well. And you could do this either locally or from the cloud if there happens to be some sort of natural disaster. Now, the where data lives is changing as well. A kind of cliche term is IT accelerated 10 years in a matter of 10 months out of necessity. And thank goodness it did. There's a lot of tools out there that have allowed us to work remotely, collaborate, chat, have our conferences. This is the world we live in. I don't get many phone calls on my cell phone anymore. I used to live on my cell phone. Now everything is, hey, let's have a Teams meeting. Let's have a WebEx or a Zoom meeting. That's how it occurs. Now, what people don't really think about is there's a lot of critical data that lives on these collaboration tools. What we saw within our report is that about a quarter of the managed service providers that we talked to had a ransomware attack on one of these software as a service applications. A lot of times it was Microsoft 365. We saw it with Dropbox. We did see it with G Suite as well. There are threats to this, and you can go out and do your own research. Again, we've got this Slack channel internally where I share all these stories that I see, but we saw an uptick in Microsoft, in Microsoft 365. About half of those business email users have become victims of that phishing malware that we've seen. Again, the opportunistic nature of these folks is going to say, yeah, I used to just sit there and do attacks on on-premise Windows-based servers because that's where the vast majority of data live. Now that we see the migration, criminals are going to follow that. And you really need to be cognizant of, is that data protected? And then do we have backups of that data as well? Because what Microsoft and G Suite have is what's called the shared responsibility model. So they're going to protect the integrity of their cloud, and their cloud is very, very secure. But the tenant, ultimately you, provides a security in their cloud, which means that if you delete data, or you have a malicious internal actor who deletes some data, or there's some form of attack that's happening because you open the door, that's your responsibility. And they will say that right in their SLA, right in their user agreement, right on their forms, that they don't have liability for that deletion or those attacks. G Suite, essentially the same language. I've done presentations alongside folks from Microsoft 365, and they will share that. They actually encourage you to have a third-party backup. They will publicly say that. And I'll leave you with another real active variant out there that's called Ransom Cloud. And I'll give you another little homework assignment after that casino story. But another one is just go Google a gentleman by the name of Kevin Mitnick. At one point, he was on the FBI's most wanted list, one of the most notorious hackers in the world. He was caught back in the 90s, a very high profile arrest. He went to jail, he came out, and now he's what's called an ethical hacker. He works with the good guys. We hired him to come to our large annual conference, our DattoCon, back in June of 2019. And he created this live variant that he coined the term Ransom Cloud. And this was not a theoretical, hey, this is what a criminal might do. No, he created a live variant. And he said, if I was still on the dark side, this is exactly what I would be doing. And he set up 2 laptops, and within minutes, he showed what it looks like. Now, if this email came into your inbox, looks pretty legitimate. Again, he's doing it very, very well. He's got the logos up there. It looks like everything else. You just sit through a webinar like this. Oh, I got to be very secure. I got to update this. Again, as we all are working in different locations, you might not pop your head up and, look at your neighbor across the cubicle and say, hey, did you get this email? You got to get back up and working. This might be the first email you see in the morning. All right, let me accept this. Once you do, every single email is now encrypted. And when you look at your organization, I talk about people, processes, and technology. A lot of times, folks will implement Microsoft 365 and give everybody admin access because it's just easier. I don't know who needs admin access. And if that's the case, well, now this has the risk of infecting the entire domain. And the only email you can click on is I'll go back to that scary red screen that says, hey, pay me some money in Bitcoin and I'll unencrypt all this stuff. This is where it's going. And remember, that's close to 2 years old, that technology that he showed, that variant. Think of where it is gone. If everything else is accelerated, the criminals have as well. And so it's very important to understand wherever that data lives, first and foremost, do an inventory of that. Where all of my physical devices to live is there critical data on that? All my SaaS applications, is there critical business data on that as well? And then, what can I do to make sure that everybody has the tools that they need to, but that also that they only have the tools that they need to. We don't just grant admin access to everybody. That is very critical. And then from there is all that data backed up. So with that, I'll turn it back over and we'll see if we've got some questions coming in. In the meantime, if anybody wants to see any of these slides or anything like that, feel free to shoot me an email. But I'll stop sharing and we can have a conversation. So Doug, you have any parting thoughts or anything to add as we start opening it up for Q&A? All right. So in the meantime, as we're kind of waiting for some of those things to come in, I think if you're looking for key takeaways, that idea of cyber resiliency, hopefully people understand that. If there's any questions that you might have about that. But the important piece is joining a webinar like this, understanding the risks, understanding what you need to do, share this with everybody within your organization. I encourage you to have a full-blown disaster recovery plan. I think that's extremely critical. As we start looking forward to what we need to do in 2021, understanding where that data lives, understanding who has access to that data is critical. Having all those systems and processes in place, because if you are attacked, does everybody know who to call? Everybody know what to do to isolate that machine? Simple things like that. Is there ongoing training going on? That all needs to be addressed. So at a minimum, try to go back again, try to get a second set of eyes on those. That's where Doug and his team can come in and do some of those things.
And I think one of the big things is that data is spread out across everywhere. It's just not on your servers anymore. It's just not in Microsoft's cloud. It could be in bits and pieces of core applications that are being hosted by your software providers. And that's the big thing is today, protecting your environment is one way, but 3 months down the road, it's going to change with an application change or a process change. And so that's something that you have to recognize is what you have today might not be suitable for 3 months or 6 months down the road. And we evaluate that quite a bit for our clients when we get to a point of talking about new applications, if they're hosted somewhere, what type of data, where is it stored at, and what's the best fit for those applications for recovery and that recovery time objective. So it's it's always changing.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I'm sure you more than even me know trying to go in and remediate a problem with somebody whose backups might have been infected or that lives in a bunch of different places. I mean, I think that 16.2 day number, especially if you're trying to handle that internally, is a pretty legitimate number, George. I mean, I think you might see the same thing.
Yeah, we've seen some of that in the past with some previous clients that, we get called in and the damage is already done and there was no planning in place. There was no backups that would go offsite or have that air gap or processes in place to mitigate the risk. And some of these times, 16 days is way too long. And some people were doing manual tickets for things and for at least 30 days until everything was restored.
Yeah, you might want to plug your ears on this one, the folks at LambTech. But I did a webinar a couple of weeks ago, about 60 people on it. And we did a poll in the middle of it. How are you backing up your data? 33% of these folks were still using tape backup, which us in the IT industry thinks that is not as prevalent, but 33%. Have you ever had to do a restore from tape, George or Doug?
Back in the day, yeah, when in the old backup exec days where you'd have to go to tape and then somebody didn't swap out the tape for the next day, generate alerts, and then we'd have to be contacting them to, hey, swap out your tape.
Yeah.
And it was tedious and it took forever to do that.
Yeah, again, another number that the criminals love. And you could go, there's a million stats. And FEMA put out a study this past year, 40% of businesses that were impacted by a natural disaster and were down for a week or more never reopened their doors. Now that they're talking about mostly hurricane season or some of the fires that happen out west, but the bottom line is downtime is downtime. And so the longer your business is down, the harder it is to get the data back and keep your doors open,
You're exactly right.
I think perhaps one of the biggest things that I've run into when I've talked with businesses is sometimes their backup is just not fully backing up all their data.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think that goes back to the taking that inventory, taking the time to understand, a lot of times people don't even know all the business applications that other departments are using. So you think you put together a small little task force, and it sounds like a big word and kind of daunting, but make sure you have buy-in from all the departments, making sure again everybody has access to what they need to, but that they only have access to what they need to. And then the data that you don't know exists and it's not being backed up, of course that's data that you're going to need when an attack occurs. It's just that's just how the world works, and it always tends to be that way. We do have a question coming in directly for you guys. How many techs, engineers in the field do you guys at LambTech have in Colombia? Or how often you're out there?
Well, we have a lot of clients that are in the Columbia area, so we've got about 15 techs in total that are able to be dispatched to any location at any time, not just in Columbia, but everywhere.
Wow.
Within our footprint, if you will.
Yeah, and I think that's critical. I do think we've seen a big shift based on a lot of the presentations I've done to folks understanding, even if you have an in-house IT team, it is critical to work with a managed service provider, with a LambTech. Again, to supplement what you have if you're an internal, do have a full-blown internal team. But if you don't, it's so hard to keep up with how quickly technology is evolving and how quickly these threats are evolving. To give a small plug for you guys, I mean, at a minimum, just have them come in, do one of these, assessments, figure out what you have. That maybe you're completely protected, but try to see if there's any gaps in there that need to be filled, because we got to make sure that 30% number comes up, or I'm going to be calling LambTech for a job, I think.
I'll give time for one more question or anything that does come in, and we do appreciate your time here so far, but do we have any other questions? Just a comment saying great presentation, and they appreciate your time as well. And Michael, I think that's going to wrap things up if we do not have any further questions.
Yeah, I really appreciate you including us on this. Just takeaways. I highly encourage reaching out to Doug, having that conversation. We just kind of touched the tip of the iceberg here. And so, just think back, people, processes, and technology. I know it sounds cliched, but that really is the important piece is internal education on it, creating that culture of security, and then making sure you have the systems in place to protect all of that data, as you mentioned, as it lives in different places. So I really appreciate you including us.
All right. Thank you, Michael from Datto, for his expertise today. We do appreciate your time to learn more about protecting your business from ransomware. Now, if you are a current client and you want to see how what you've learned today pertains to your agreement, feel free to reach out to us after the webinar. If you're wanting to learn more about Lam Tech and our offerings, you can call me direct at 660-851-7342. And also learn even more at lamtech.com. You will be getting a recording of this that'll be available as well. We'll give you the details on that in email, but thank you and have a fantastic day.
Thanks, everybody.